I have the right to free speech. You hear it all the time, right? But what does that actually mean? It turns out some of the most common ideas about the First Amendment, well, they're just plain wrong. So let's break down what this fundamental right is and, just as importantly, what it isn't. All right, let's just dive right in with the big one. Does the First Amendment mean you can say absolutely anything you want, whenever you want, with zero consequences? For a lot of folks, the answer seems like a simple yes. But the real answer, the legal answer, is a very clear, very direct no. The right to free speech has never, ever been absolute. And this, right here, gets to the absolute core of the whole misunderstanding. The popular myth is that free speech is this magical shield that lets you say anything, anywhere. But the reality? It's much more specific. The First Amendment isn't a rule for you, it's a rule for the government. Its entire purpose is to stop them from jailing you or fining you for your speech. It has almost nothing to say about what private companies or other people can do. So, to really unpack all of this, here's our game plan. We're going to look at what the amendment actually says, explore the kinds of speech that have basically zero protection, see how even protected speech can be limited, and then, finally, we'll see how this all plays out in the digital world where we spend so much of our time. Okay, so let's get down to basics. The number one thing you have to remember about the First Amendment is that it's all about what the government can and can't do. Here it is, straight from the source. The key words are right at the beginning. Congress shall make no law. Now, this was originally written just to limit the federal government, but over time, through a legal process you might have heard of called incorporation, the Supreme Court has said, nope, this applies to state and local governments too. And this is the core principle in action. The amendment is a leash on the government, not on private citizens or companies. That's exactly why your boss at a private company can have rules about what you say on the job. And, fun fact, it also protects your right not to speak. The government can't force you to say the Pledge of Allegiance, for example. The Supreme Court's whole idea here is to protect what they call a marketplace of ideas, where all sorts of views, even offensive ones, can compete. But, and this is a huge but, that marketplace has some very hard limits. There are entire categories of speech that get little to no protection from the government at all. Let's take a look at the boundaries. Yeah, over the years, the Supreme Court has basically carved out these exceptions. Things like obscenity, fraud, and speech that's designed to start a riot right now. The government is allowed to punish that. The right is not absolute. For this explainer, we're going to zoom in on one of the trickiest ones, true threats. So what in the world is a true threat? Well, it's a statement where you're seriously trying to communicate that you're going to commit an act of unlawful violence. The key thing here isn't just the words you use, but the goal of making your target genuinely fear for their safety. You know, to really understand what a true threat is, it helps to look at a classic case of what it isn't. Back in 1969, at an anti-war rally, an 18-year-old kid named Robert Watts said this about President Lyndon B. Johnson. He was actually convicted for threatening the president, but the Supreme Court stepped in and overturned his conviction. The court decided this wasn't a genuine threat, but was, and this is a great phrase, political hyperbole. And out of this case, we got a three-part test that courts still use. First, they look at the context. It was a heated political rally, not a quiet, menacing letter. Second, the condition. He said, if they ever make me. It was hypothetical. And third, the reaction of the crowd. Apparently they laughed. All this just goes to show you, when it comes to threats, context is absolutely everything. Okay, but what about speech that is protected? Even then, the government can still set some rules of the road for how, when, and where you get to express yourself. These are known as time, place, and manner restrictions. So for example, the government can't ban your protest, but it can say you need a permit to shut down a major street during rush hour. It can also tell you can't blast a loudspeaker in a quiet neighborhood at 3 in the morning. The really critical part is that these rules have to be about the logistics, not the message itself. And this leads us to a super important legal line in the sand. A law that is content-based, say one that bans only protests about a certain political issue, is almost always going to be struck down as unconstitutional. But a content-neutral law, like one that says no protests of any kind are allowed within 50 feet of a hospital entrance, that's much more likely to be okay. See the difference? It's regulating the location, not the viewpoint. All of that sets the stage perfectly for our final section, which, let's be honest, is where this gets really relevant for most of us today. Speech in the digital age.
So here's the big question, right? If the First Amendment is all about putting limits on the government, what does that mean for giant platforms like YouTube, Facebook, or X? They're moderating speech all day, every day. Are they allowed to do that? And the answer goes right back to that very first principle we talked about. Yes, they absolutely can. Because they are private companies, they are not the government. That means they are not bound by the First Amendment, and they are totally free to write their own rules, their own community guidelines, and terms of service. And you better believe those private rules can be way, way stricter than the First Amendment. Just take a look at YouTube's community guidelines. They have detailed policies against hate speech, harassment, and misinformation in ways the government could never dream of doing. A private platform's goal isn't to protect a constitutional marketplace of ideas, it's to build and maintain a specific kind of online community that they want. So how do they enforce all this? Well, it's a massive, massive operation. It's usually a combination of AI that automatically flags content and thousands of human reviewers who make the final call. A lot of them use a strike system. You get a warning first, then maybe a strike that freezes your account for a week, and if you get 3 strikes in about 90 days, your channel can get terminated for good. So at the end of the day, while the First Amendment protects you from government censorship, it offers you basically no protection on the private platforms where we spend so much of our lives. And that leaves us with one of the biggest, most important questions of our time. If these private companies now own our public square, who should be writing the rules?